Lori Butierries is a full-time caregiver to two children with special needs, one child being terminally ill and physically disabled. Lori uses her life experiences and the medical knowledge she gained while serving as a hospital corpsman in the United States Navy to help others facing similar hardships. Lori focuses primarily on advocating for and educating others about the special needs, mental health, and veterans communities. Her long-term goal is to reduce the stigma associated with disability by talking about it with people of all ages, thus minimizing the fear and the mystery attributed to the unknown. So today, thank you so much, Lori, for joining me in this conversation. It's an important conversation to have. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
When we just jump right into things, Lori, I mean, you manage in a single day what may very well be more than most people do in an entire week. Walk us through a typical day in the life of you.
Sure. To begin with, let me just start with my son's disorder, because that kind of helps to give a better understanding of what we're talking about. My son's primary diagnosis is spinal muscular atrophy, and there are several types. He is type 1, and type 1 is the worst in regards to prognosis. So Jacob was not expected to live past his second birthday. But because of the phenomenal medical care he's received and just his own resiliency, he's outlived that prognosis now by 10 years, which is a miracle, to say the least. But because its disease is degenerative, it kills off motor neurons, whether voluntary and involuntary, right? The ones that affect the body. He's deteriorating before our eyes. And so his body has lost a lot of mobility and things that most people have. You know, it affects his swallow, it affects his ability to turn his head, to move his arms, to walk, to go to the bathroom, because your gut and your bowels, they all have motor neurons that make them work. So because of all these things, he requires 24-hour care. Thankfully, we were able to get in-home nursing once I kind of sucked it up and realized I can't do this all on my own. So they come for 12 hours a day during the day so I can help my other child, who also has special needs. She's autistic. And then my son, I do his night care, around the clock night care, because he requires constant positioning. So going forward with that, after 12 years of living this lifestyle, we have thankfully developed a schedule. We talk G-tube feeds, you talk medications, you talk treatments and therapies. And these are primarily in-home, although we do see specialists out in town. And so we've got it down to like a fine art, but it's very business-like. It's really hard to fit in time for them to be kids on a day-to-day basis, to do fun things, because there's so much going on and revolving around his day-to-day care. So forgive me, I'm trying to get not like lost. I'm so tired. It was another long night, so I'm having brain fog today. So that's kind of at this point in time, like, we've done well. The only thing I would say that in our day-to-day life is that and how COVID has impacted us specifically is that it's made us slow down. At one point we were averaging 50 appointments a month between the two kids, between in-home services and out in town services. And that's a lot to go. The phone calls, the emails, it was just constant bombardment for like the last 12 years. And when COVID hit, that majority of it went away, and we had time just to sit and think. Now, not his day-to-day maintenance, like we were just discussing, the feeds and meds, treatments, but just time to think. Right. And so that you really realize the toll that living in constant fight or flight has taken on you, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, your relationships with your spouses or significant others. So that's kind of been eye-opening for us within this time frame. But the day-to-day care, it's just pretty routine at this point. You only know what you know, and this has become our normal. And so to us, it's nothing. But to other people looking in, they're like, "Oh my word, we don't know how you do it. That's so much." But you adjust, like most things in life. That lifestyle changes.
Right. You acclimate. You just rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's an incredible life you lead, and I just give you so much credit. The strength that you have that you don't even realize you have anymore, because again, you're just going through the motions, you're just accepting a new norm. And but for those of us outside looking in, um,
Thanks.
cannot applaud you enough for the work that you do out of the love for your children and your family. And what a beautiful thing to dedicate your life and your time and your service to. It's really beautiful. And I'm not going to start crying right now, because there's time for that in a minute, I'm sure. So, what of all of the things, what are the hardest things of all the hard things that you do, mentally and physically, about being a mother of a child with disability? Oh, Jacob's mother.
Sure. So there are several things, and for Jacob in particular, for him, he's coming to realize that he can't walk, he can't use his legs, and so he keeps trying to pray away, or wish away, or magic away his disability. And he has a secondary of diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder as well as my daughter. And so unfortunately, some things you just can't talk him through. You can't rationalize with him. He fixates on a thought, and that's the way it is, right? And then if you try to talk with him about it, and he gets emotional and just has breakdowns, and it's so hard, because you're trying to be truthful. You're trying to as gently as you can tell them about, well, this is just who you are. This is just the way you were made, and that's okay. It's okay to be different. That he told me the other day, I don't want to be different. I want to be perfect. And I'm like, you are perfect. You're perfect just the way you are. And it's so hard, because I don't know where he's getting from. That's all him. That's not us putting those words in his mouth. I mean, we live in pretty much isolation, so it's not like he's getting it from anybody else.
Right.
It is just something he's discovered for himself, or has, I don't know, processed inwardly. And it's so hard to help him navigate that when he is determined to change it, right? And then so that's like my biggest struggle right now with Jacob, beyond like just the scary aspects. Like, we have a surgery coming up, another major surgery that could potentially be life-threatening, and it's just like it's just never ending. And and having to put your kids through that kind of pain, like I will hurt you to help you, and they don't understand that. They're just like, mommy, make it go away, as you're pinning them to the bed and making the doctors, not making, let me rephrase, assisting the doctors with doing these things, right? And they're looking at you with faith and hope and trust, and you almost like you're betraying that, but you have to hurt them in order to help them. And it's just so hard to balance that. And then with my daughter, because I do have two children with special needs, and Jacob's condition is so intensive, right? All the things that he requires, the round-the-clock care, and things can go bad very quickly.
Right.
And when you're trying to balance and you're trying to figure out who needs what when, and you triage, like in medicine, like, okay, what's the most important thing? Who needs, like, now, imminent care? She gets put on the back burner a lot. And sometimes she'll tell me, it's okay, Mom, it's not your fault. And I die a little inside, because I'm like, it is my fault. Like, it is me making these decisions, but it's not for lack of love. And then, I hear her, like, when Jacob gets admitted to the hospital, they're long stays. They're not just like a in and out type situation. And I'm by his bedside 24/7 while he's there. Right. Beyond just interpreting, but doing the one-on-one care as well. And my daughter had spoken with me over the phone one night when I was wishing her good night. She goes, when are you coming home? She said, aren't you my mother too? Oh my God. It's nothing, it's hard to not feel like a failure when your kids have to ask those questions because they're unsure.
Right.
And I just use that to motivate myself to try harder, to really make that time. You make time for the things that are important to you, and just really remembering that, she has needs too, and they're equally important, even though they're different.
Right.
These are the three things, I guess you could say, that have been really hard as a parent with special needs children.
Well, yes. So, I mean, in what perspective, Laura, your story for the mothers and fathers who have kids with special needs and those who don't, your story is equally important for both sides,
just to understand and gain that perspective to say, wow, I think I'm having a hard day. I think that if she can do this, if she can get through this, I surely can find the strength to do this. You know, so I just, in the middle of all of this, just I want to again thank you for sharing of yourself and of your life with us. You know, being a mom is hard work. Being a mom of a child, of children with disabilities, is even harder. For other moms out there raising a child with a disability or disabilities, what advice would you offer them for hard times? What advice do you give yourself when it just feels like it's too hard?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. This was a huge one for me when I starting off down this path. It was asking for help. I have a hard time asking for help. Because now I'm a stay-at-home mom, I feel like I don't have the right to ask for help because I have all this time, right? And what do? You stay at home. You're just a mom. So it's like, I don't want to come across as weak or needy or be a burden to people. You know, I'm like, I can do this. I can manage. And you think to yourself, like, no one's going to love my kids as much as I do, or nobody's going to take care of or be as invested in them as I am, right? Mm-hmm. And so you talk yourself into this state, like it's all on me, right. All this pressure, right? And it gets really lonely very fast. And even if you're married or you have a significant other and you guys are going through, it's like your child, or you guys are, you know, you have somebody that you're both involved in their care, you can process things differently. So you can be both hurting, but not be able to cope or lean on each other because you both are not managing what you're going through that well, right? There's different ways to cope and grieve. And so it does get lonely, even if you have somebody in the house with you side by side. And so I would just encourage other mamas out there to not be afraid to ask for help, whether it's through a support group like on Facebook or Instagram. I'm new to Instagram, but they have other, you know, people on there that you can reach out to. I'm huge on behavioral health services. Now, I wasn't. I thought back in the day, you know, that, and I was taught like that's just for weak people. And I think that's absolutely not true. I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to be vulnerable and to say, I need help and I can't do this, and to get those services, because they teach you very important coping skills that you need and that will benefit not just you, but your children and your spouse and those around you. And there's no shame in that. And the same thing too with in-home nursing. Like I thought I could tough it out. I thought I didn't need anybody, but then my son's pulmonologist yelled at me one day. I don't like this. Like I admire this man. You know, I appreciate like that he's being a doctor, even that he's not an enabler. He's not holding my hand. We're not friends. He had something to say. He was not afraid to share it. Right.
Right.
And he was like, you know, you are a mess. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. He was probably a little more professional about it, but he's like, you're barely awake on your feet. You look like a zombie. He's like, you know, your reaction time, if there's an emergency, will be slow, and you may miss something critical because you can't function like this. You get like next to no sleep. You're lucky if you get 2 or 3 hours of sleep, you know, per our conversation and his questions. Like, no, he's like, I have offered you in-home nursing multiple times, not just as a nice thing to do, because I think you need it. Like, right. I don't just do these things for no reason. And I just felt like such a crap parent, right? Like he's sitting there like, but I needed that. Like I needed that tough love. And it was eye-opening. Now having somebody come in your home and they see everything, right? They see your messiness. They see your bad days and you're sad or crying. They see the fights between spouses, because there's nothing private when people are in your home.
Right.
But after we've gained our trust and we've established this relationship between myself and the nurse, the first time I went to go grocery shopping without my kid in tow, like Jacob, I stopped to stare at him in the parking lot because I was so relieved that I knew he would be okay. And then it wasn't just all on me and that he was in good hands. And it was just such like an epiphany, right? So I would encourage people to try to seek those services if you are eligible, if they're offered to you. There is no shame. It's a team effort. It really does take a village. And sometimes I can't be the mom my kids need. Like I am going to come up short and I'm going to fail them, not because of lack of love or lack of desire, but that's just life, right?
Yeah.
But there are other people who could step up and step in when you are not able. Mm-hmm. And that's such a blessing, and it's such a thing to have in your life if you can get it. Mm-hmm. You know, and just remember that you're going to fail yourself. Your husband's going to fail you. Your friends and your family are going to disappoint you. They're going to say stuff when they're trying to be encouraging that's be highly insulting. And just show them a little grace. Show yourself some grace for being human and get mad. Show them grace for not knowing, because you only know what you know.
Yeah.
And just try to go elsewhere. You know, like I said, those support groups, the behavioral health, whether it's group therapy or one-on-one. Like I suck at one-on-one because I get nervous, but group, I'm great. Like I love people.
Right.
You know, and it's nice to be around other people who are hurting too, because then you don't feel like such an oddball. You know, it's not just you. And maybe, and I loved being in a room with other people, not that I enjoyed their suffering, but just knowing that I wasn't an object of pity anymore. Like people weren't just pitying me. And then they would call me out, like the doctor, right? We're not friends. We're not enablers. Like they would say, oh, I think you're being a little sensitive and this is why. And nobody wants to hear that. But after I got mad and I think about it later on, I'm like, well, you're right. Like maybe that reaction was a bit extreme for the offense, right? And it was eye-opening. It allowed me to assess myself, assess the situation, not just constantly be on the defense.
Yeah.
Or feeling like a victim of life. Like, not that everybody is, I'm just saying, like for me in my story, like that was so helpful and it gave me perspective, and I needed that, right? Because you kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? You withdraw into yourself and you hide from the world, and you know, it becomes all about you, not on purpose, but that's what you're living, right? Like it's just, you're so involved in what's going around you. You forget that others are hurting. And and then I came to realize too, like hard is hard. Like just because, so all these things that we talked about with me, that's the hardest I've ever experienced, right? This is my level of hard, but somebody else could be going through something that's less to me because it's not all this, right? But that's the hardest that they've ever experienced. Like they are at their max capacity for dealing with hardship, and so am I. So we are equal in our suffering in that regard. We are both overwhelmed, and we are both at our max levels of endurance. Does that make sense? So it's like hard is hard. Like I don't think necessarily there's a hierarchy. Like this is your max, and this is my max. We're together there, sister.
Right, for sure. There is like a sliding scale of suffering, like, right? Like it's just depending on what you've tolerated, what you've endured, you know. And if you've reached the ceiling of that, you know, then wow, that's a really interesting perspective. And that's really helpful, I think, for a lot of people who feel, because there are so many people who feel like, well, I have it bad, but there are other people who have it way worse. I don't have a right to be overwhelmed. I don't have a right to need help because there's other people who, you know, so, and then just the opposite is true too. You know, people say, and you're like, okay, let me just tell you. But yeah, no, and so I hear you. It's that help thing, right? And I think that's probably the hardest. And do you find also, I know as a mom, I've felt this way, that we are our own, every person is their own worst critic, but you know, certainly and specifically as a mom, there will never be anyone who will judge you more and come down on you harder than yourself. And so I love how you said you have to give yourself grace, give other people around you grace, but give yourself grace. And I think maybe that's where it needs to start. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It's you know, you were a hospital corpsman in the U.S. Navy. First of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And what did you gain in the Navy that helped you as a mom? Because a lot of people probably wouldn't make that correlation. Like what can you gain from that experience to the experience of a mom?
Absolutely. So I, first and foremost, training. I was in the medical field, and having that prior knowledge, when my son got diagnosed, so he got diagnosed first before my daughter, even though she's older, he got diagnosed first. And so when we got his diagnosis, as overwhelming and heartbreaking as that was, and it was quite devastating. You know, nobody wants to hear that, you know, your kid only has, or is projected to live for 2 years of life, you know, and like how you wrap your mind around that, and you're just in despair and you're falling apart. But having that knowledge, that medical knowledge prior, it enabled me to ask questions that I needed to know. And when we were given equipment and medications and stuff, like overnight, like this, you become a special needs parent overnight.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know what I mean? There may be like some gradual, some people, like their kids are progressively getting worse. Like Jacob wasn't really symptomatic other than just being kind of like floppy and like lazy. I mean, he was still an infant when he got diagnosed. So, but some other people, like maybe their kids were normal and then they're progressively getting worse, and it's taken a long time to get that diagnosis. So they've already been kind of dealing with that. That wasn't my story, but so maybe they were dealing with that beforehand without knowing what was going on. So when I got that diagnosis, having that medical knowledge helped me to ask the right questions, to take those treatments, take those medical equipment and roll with it, right? Like I was like, okay, yes, I'm dying inside, I'm freaking out, but like, okay, what do I need to do? Like, again, the triaging, okay, deal with that later, cry in the shower, like, well, how do we manage? And that's what that helped me do in that aspect. And then it also, I've gone to war, I'm a combat vet. So having been in those type of environments and training, for those, you always do all these workups and training, these scenarios when you're in the military for wartime situations. So it's high stress, high pressure situation that you're training for even before you get there. Mm-hmm. So you don't shut down, like when things happen, like you're still able to function effectively and help and do the things that you're supposed to do, almost come rote, right? Your skills. And that's kind of what it helped me to utilize in these abilities as a special needs mom, which was funny because I never would have guessed when I got out that would be something that I would like lean heavily upon, right? Or these type of abilities. And I am so thankful that I did have those skills to reach out and utilize at this time and continue to utilize.
Yeah. I sort of think that, in all your spare time, you should probably put together like a boot camp program for moms of kids with disabilities. Like, hey, let me just tell you, here's what we do. These are the skills. But in your spare time, so switching gears a bit, Lori, people write books for a number of reasons. Please share with us why you wrote Gift from God and what it's all about.
Sure, absolutely. So believe it or not, that book was like 15 years in the making. I originally wrote the poem for my daughter when she was born. And then as my children, they both got their diagnoses and things that came back to me. And I wound up revamping it to address that specifically, raising children with special needs. And this one primarily focuses on Diagnosis Day. And I think that is such an important topic because it is the beginning of many, many people's chapters in this journey. Again, not everybody, because some people have older kids that are, then they get progressively worse. But for a lot of us, that's the day that things kick off and we take on that mantle as special need moms and dads. And so, but it's not talked about. I mean, people will like throw up like, oh, today's the anniversary of my kid's Diagnosis Day. And then it's just kind of quiet. And I hate that because it's so important. And so many people don't understand what that means, the impact that it has on you, like even how to help. And I don't know how anybody else was, but like when my son got diagnosed, everybody was like, how do we help? How do we help? And I didn't necessarily need physical assistance. I mean, meals are great and things like that. I mean, I've never dog or, dismiss a free meal, but just understanding, finding, like we were talking about loneliness, right? That it's such a lonely life. And especially when this happens, your world is upended. You don't know right from wrong. It's like you're living a nightmare. You only find peace in your dreams. It's just having somebody understand the complexity of that, why it's so severe, having patience for you as you try to process and move, not past, but forward down this new avenue, right, of life. And this is what the story's about. So it gently touches on Diagnosis Day and then how to move forward after that. And I try to do it in a way that it's easy on the heart, but still practical. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times you get these resources. Okay, here's your diagnosis. This is the prognosis. And here's a bunch of like pamphlets or books full of just medical jargon or scary facts. And it is overwhelming, especially if you don't have medical background at all. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, how can I do something that will introduce this or enable people to have this conversation, to spark this conversation, right? Like I would not put this on like a typical bookshelf and just like my nephew, I guess he opened my sister bought a book. And so she left it out. My nephew picked it up. He's like, oh, yay, book. And he opened it and he saw like a baby in the incubator, scared of me, threw it. The image was intimidating.
Right.
So it may not be like this just gentle, like, oh, so cute, but it does touch on very real aspects in a very sweet way that many people can relate to, and to help talk about things. Like my son, when I read it to him, which I was kind of scared about, because I'm like, oh, how is he going to take this, right? And he was like, oh, she's pregnant with a baby just like me. Did you love me? Was I the best? And then, oh, he's got tubes just like me. And for my daughter, I'm like, do you remember why he had these tubes? Like being able to have these just in a gentle way that may not be blatantly stated in the wording of the book, but like it's in the pictures. Right. And so I just wanted to be able to help people and have that conversation and maybe put a resource out there that would be reassure some first time parents. It's okay. Things do work out. This is how, you know, first is trial and error. Then there's a lot of asking and researching. And then, you know, you just come to a new norm. You know, you may not be able to change what's happening, but you can change your perspective and how you decide to cope with what's going on with you. And for me, this is a faith-based novel because I lean heavily on my faith to get me through things. If I didn't have hope, then I feel like I would know what to do.
Right.
But I did when I was writing this book and trying to figure out like how best to present it to others, ask a bunch of people in my support group, would you be interested in reading a faith book if you were not yourself in, you know, a religious person or into this? Like, how would that appeal to you? And they said it would be great as long as it was true to the journey, to the story. And so that's what we tried to do, the illustrator and myself, is try to make the pictures, at least in that regard, like very much fact-based. Like this is kind of like how most things play out.
Right.
So hopefully it'll appeal to a larger audience in that respect. Like you can at least go, okay, yes, I can see how that would transpire. But again, it's just to spark that conversation because people's responses to disability are quite unpleasant or sometimes extreme. It's scary. You know, they're scared of things they don't understand and they don't know. And so by helping them to understand it, again, it builds that compassion, that patience, that understanding, and it just makes the world a better place all around for everybody.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's a perfect tool, a perfect resource for like making that transition to say, okay, this is a new world. This is going to be a new thing for me, and it's okay. I mean, there's the thing, right? Like it's okay not to be okay, and people have the hardest time accepting that. But for you to be able to say, not only is it okay not to be okay, but it is normal to not, you know, feel okay right now, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah. And I can, from personal experience, the moment, you know, like as you're talking about like diagnosis day, and I'm thinking back and to, you know, the peds ICU and thinking back to that moment when I realized the shift that was about to happen for me, and how there was just this flurry of emotions and confusion and like disbelief and just completely lost. And it's not like the hospital said, here's some, like you're saying, here's literature about this, here's a bunch of things you're never gonna be able to pronounce, here's a lot of things that you don't need to ever pronounce. And, you know, but something about like, what do I do with what's happening here? What do I do there? Because I got it, I understand what here, but what do I do about this? You know, so having a book like yours that says, okay, I'm here for you, and we're gonna have this conversation. I think that's so beautiful. So
thank you.
Yeah. So gift from God is gonna be a huge gift, I would imagine, for so many people, to be able to adapt and find a new way forward, you know. So
I certainly hope so. So thank you for thinking that.
yeah, no, I do. And I'm excited to order a copy because I would like to have one, just because I think it's so important for people to have, again, these resources. And again, with, you know, with AwareNow, with what we're doing, is like we give the resource of storytelling. And whether you're telling the story or hearing the story, there's something to be gained that will help you. And, you know, it's similar to your book and what you're putting out there that way. So, you know, and like anytime you go to a support group or have a conversation that way, it's like that exchange, that, you know, of energy, of emotion. What a huge benefit.
Oh, absolutely. It's critical.
Yeah. Well, I just can't thank you enough so much for sharing your story and for making me cry, and for all the things. So if people want to know more about your book, how do people get their hands on this piece of literature?
Sure. So it is for sale on Amazon, but it is also available on Ingram Spark. I guess that's more wholesale, but it is still there for individual purposes as well. But definitely Amazon.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for giving people a bit of perspective. If you don't deal with, a child who has disabilities, perspective that way for people who do, for giving them comfort and hope and strength. I hope you know that you do that just by showing up, just by being. You are doing so much.
Thank you.
So, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me a cry, Allie.
Sorry. And we end with tears. That's
All
all
good.
part of it. Hey, it's antifreeze for the soul, so we've got no issues there. We're good.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your time today, Lori, for sharing your truth, for sharing what's real in your world and in the worlds of so many that just don't have the opportunity to talk about it, for your inspiration, for your suggestions. It's going to go a long way. So thank you for that, and sending you and your kiddos and your husband, your whole family, so much love and light. Thank you for making everyone a bit more aware now.
Thanks, Allie. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.